Hi, everyone. Welcome to another CJL Spotlight. I'm going to let some folks come in. My name is Raie, and I am the Center for Justice and Law's Program Coordinator. I am so excited about our conversation today. We have such an amazing guest who is going to be speaking about her work at the legislature, her work as a student, and she just joined us. Hey!
Oh,
It's so good to see you.
yes, it's so good to see you too.
Uh, this is going to be such a great conversation. I'm so happy that you're with us today. I don't want to waste any time because we have a short 30 minutes. So
hmm
I'm just going to let you start off by introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit more about your work.
Yeah, well, hi everyone. My name is SJ Welch, but my full name is Sarah Jean Welch, and I go by SJ to acknowledge my middle name, which is named after my grandmother, Jeannie, who comes from the Mdewakanton Dakota tribe here in Minnesota. So first, I'd like just to acknowledge that we are on Dakota land today, and I'm just really excited for this conversation. So that's me. I'm a student at Hamlin studying social justice, criminology, and legal studies, and I have a big dream of becoming a criminal justice attorney one day. So we'll see if that comes to fruition.
We can't wait to see that. So, at the Center for Justice and Law, this year our theme is health, justice, and the law. And this year we're focusing specifically on reproductive, or this semester, I should say, we're focusing on reproductive justice issues. So, I know that you are a huge advocate in this space, a huge leader. If you could just say a little bit more about how your work relates to health, justice, and law broadly, and also how your work relates to reproductive justice.
Yeah, so through my education, I focus a lot on women in the justice system, in the incarceration system, and that's a part of the a huge concentration of my major and of my research that I've done. And so that has led me to an amazing internship right now with State Senator Mary Kunish Podine. And the senator is amazing. She last session she was in the House and she was able to pass just an historic bill that got funding to create the first ever missing and murdered Indigenous women task force. And because of that, she was also able to put this task force together and get a report. And the report just came out in December. And so my internship with her has been focusing a lot on research, more research, always more research, to now use what we found to create these bills and get them passed in now the state Senate, which is Republican run, and the House is Democratic. So we're trying to make this a very bipartisan bill. So we're just doing a lot of research, and a lot of it comes down to the intersectionality of BIPOC women and the incarceration system, and disproportionate amounts of them being involved in the incarceration system. And so that's kind of my work. I've also focused a bit of my research on some ICWA proceedings, which have a lot to do with families, which is reproductive justice through and through, and as well as incarceration of women and the maltreatment of them in the United States prison system.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I really love how you spoke about your work right now at the legislature. I think are some people are like, how can we get reproductive justice issues legislated? Like, what does that look like when creating a bill? So I'm curious, like, what's your thought process? Like, I know you have this commitment to reproductive justice, but what does that look like when you're creating bills? How do you, because there's so many issues that we could, like reproductive justice issues here at the Center for Justice and Law is everything, right? It's everything and anything. And how when you're working on bills, how do you like manage that, and how do you think through that to create your bills?
Good question. So I think the biggest way is we do live in a Republican Democratic world. And so we have to be able to talk across the aisle wherever we stand. And a great way to do that is through looking at the children. And reproductive justice is about, creating children, is about, bringing children into this world, and about mothers being allowed to raise their children. And so one of the major issues for women that end up going missing or murdered is they have experienced trauma. And one of a big issue in Indigenous communities is the displacement of Native children transracially into white adoptive homes. And so right now we're like, that is a bipartisan issue. Like, we're going to be able to look at this and say, these children are being traumatized. This is against, constitutionally, ICWA. And so we look at things that can be seen as like, what is morally everyone can agree on, like children being with their mothers. And so we look at that, and then we create legislation that kind of builds on top of that. And what I tend to do is I add a little bit until someone in the room gets uncomfortable. So I'll add like, well, what about women who maybe don't fit the demographic that you're comfortable with? Or what if, there's certain social work, welfare policies that we don't quite agree with because they're not cross-cultural. And then until we get to the point where usually someone gets uncomfortable at the point where like, well, mothers who have been incarcerated deserve the right to be a part of their children's lives. And then we get some people uncomfortable. So we kind of push it as far as we can go. And then as soon as people start getting uncomfortable, we're like, okay, maybe we should just write the bill up until this point and then keep doing the personal work of getting these people on board.
Tell us more about that personal work. Clearly I work in policy, so I'm very interested in this. Like when we talk about reproductive justice issues, and you touched on this, but it's not just the right to have a child and to not have a child, but it's also the ability for a child for a mother, for a person who's parenting, to be able to raise their child in a society that deems them valuable, right?
Yeah.
Of the most basic resources we're talking about here, like people having the ability to be housed, people to have food, people to have shelter, and people to have security. Like these are just basic principles that we still haven't achieved. So when you're going into these negotiations with policymakers, as much I have too, what are some of the strategies that you use to make sure that we're centering our conversation on the needs of our people?
Well, I've had the amazing opportunity to work with Sandy Whitehawk recently, and she's a member of a tribe in Minnesota, and she said facts and data, they mean something to people. Sadly, in the Native communities, we love to sit down and just hear stories, and we should allow that to change us. But when it comes to legislation, a lot of the times we need to bring those stories into percentages and into numbers. And so I think a lot of the times it's learning to communicate in a way that the person that you're trying to communicate with will hear you. So I always think, like, who am I talking to? Am I talking to, a family member? Am I talking to my dad who has a heart of gold? Or am I talking to a Republican legislator? Or am I talking to someone who wants to be educated and wants to be an ally and wants to promote this bill and wants to reach out to their, representatives? And so kind of using that, a lot of it comes down to using the data. And so it's been amazing to now have reports come out. Well, first of all, we needed to get funding for those reports, so we need people to care. But now that we have the reports come out, it's amazing to have that data to be able to use, because now we're able to say, you funded this data, it's bipartisan, and it has found that, children in Minnesota are 20 times more likely, Native children are 20 times more likely to be displaced than white children. Like, disproportionate rates. And so now there's like, we have to acknowledge that, because I did vote to fund this report. And so, understanding that. And I think for me, the personal work really happened when I began to understand women in the incarceration system being traumatized by not having the children in their lives, and realizing how we are perpetuating issues. And it comes down to even just a kid being placed in foster care for a month. Understanding that we have a responsibility to children. Native American communities teach that at the center of the circle are the children. And so being able to understand that we come around these children and we make what's best for them is also making what's best for the moms. because we are also a matriarchal society. We believe that women are the bearers of life because they are. And to honor that is to teach women how to be better mothers. And, you know, a lot of the times, you know, fingers get pointed and they get said, you know, but, you know, there's all these stereotypes of different things, but historical trauma has a major role. And so that was a part of the report too, was acknowledging that, you know, people who descended from people who went to boarding schools, people who descended from mothers who were displaced and transracially adopted, people who descended from um, all the way back to the Dakota War, the people that fought and survived, they all have different traumas that they bring into this world. And so I think just having the statistics to be able to communicate that makes sense to people. But I do wish we could get to a society where I just was able to share a story of someone or share a video and say, hey, can you care about this person enough to draft this policy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks for reflecting on that with me. You mentioned the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report that recently came out. I did read it. It is like I recommend everyone on this call. If there's one thing that I can recommend, and I'm sure SJ is going to say other things, is to read that report. It's pretty damning. Like honestly, what Minnesota has to do a lot better. Minnesota and this nation has to do a lot better. I understand that one of the main recommendations that came out of the report is to fund the establishment of a missing and murdered Indigenous women's office. And I also know that the senator is authoring the Missing and Murdered African American Women Act in the Senate. So I'm curious, like, what are some of your next steps in certain, you know, while working with the senator, and how do you think this is gonna fit into the greater landscape of reproductive justice issues advancing in Minnesota?
Yeah, so very I'm going to speak to my opinion kind of moving forward and what I've learned from the senator. But I'm really excited we've been working on drafting the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force Office because the governor just came out and allotted $500,000 to the creation of the office, and it's being able to run, which means that we would have to be able to have 4-time full staff, which is crazy because it's like $500,000, but that's when it comes down to it, 4-time full-time staff. And so right now we're creating a lot of the logistics. And so a lot of the times with policies, before you even get to the voting part, you have to prove to your colleagues on the floor that it's legit, and there's plans set in place that after it gets voted on, you have a good established procedure that you'll follow. So right now we're creating fact sheets, we're creating binders, we're creating all of this kind of like onboarding process for these future, hopefully full-time employees working in this office. This office would be historic and revolutionary for Native American women, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I'm going to say Two-Spirit people as well, which is the Native American equivalent of the LGBTQIA community, are misplaced at disproportionate rates, and it's quite a sad topic to understand. But we've had to do a lot of the research into where is the demand coming from, you know, who is buying these women and where is it happening. And so understanding those things is something that the office is going to be able to have full-time employees spending their lives protecting these women, such as like line 3 right now going in. The Dakota pipeline is going through Native American reservations up north, and there's, you know, a lot of protests and stuff going on. But a big thing people don't understand is in mining and construction, when those things happen on Native American communities, there is now a demand for sex trafficking, and so women in those communities are being targeted. And so to have the missing and murdered, you know, task force office be able to say, you know what, this is our job, this is what we do, we know that this is going to affect this community, we're going to send, you know, better resources to the police officers and law enforcement around this area to protect these women. And so hopefully we'll see, you know, numbers go down and Native women not being targeted. But yeah, it's pretty revolutionary. And it's also, because it's revolutionary, it's very new. And so we have to kind of brainstorm what would make this be more efficient and better serve these communities from the little data, because we just have this report and a few others that we have. And it's also it's kind of speaking to some research that I've done personally, Operation Lady Justice, which Trump in the campaign created, would kind of clash with some of the needs that the Missing and Murdered Office is trying to fulfill, because they're still not serving Indigenous communities, because there's no one on Operation Lady Justice that is from Indigenous descent, which representation is a huge deal for these issues.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Speaking of that, um, I'm wondering, what does it mean for you as a Native woman to walk the halls of the Capitol? I don't even know if you're in person at all right now. I know the House is fully virtual and the Senate is some sort of hybrid model. But what does it mean to be a Native woman walking in spaces that, much like myself, you're probably not represented in?
Yeah. Well, I'll acknowledge that I identify as white coded Dakota. Like if I walked into a room, you wouldn't necessarily see that I am from a Native American tribe. But for me, I've felt very close to my ancestors lately. I felt the community come around me a lot, and I felt like there's a saying that's your ancestors stand behind you in all that you do, and the footsteps that they made before you are the ones that you're stepping in, and so you don't go alone anywhere. And
Yeah.
so for me, we're fully virtual right now, and so it's a lot of Zoom meetings. Um, but I think I get in these meetings with these women that are absolutely like activists that have been working in these fields their entire lives, and I'm just awestruck, and I just sit there and I think so much about my grandma, who was, displaced from her home at a young age and experienced that trauma. And I think about my aunties, and I think about, my dad and the different childhoods that they had. And I think about how this policy work and this legislation would help them so much. And I think it just makes me feel like they're with me, and I feel that, that calm. And the other day I was working on internship stuff and a bald eagle flew outside my window, and I live downtown, which is like, what? And in Native American teachings, a bald eagle represents your ancestors. And so like your ancestors visiting you. And for me, it always happens when I just need that extra, like, I'm here with you. And so that's how it's felt. I think that it's beautiful to be working with the first ever person in the state Senate to be of Indian descent. Because she's the face that I see all the time, and so I'm like, yeah, we have space here. Like, don't tell us we don't have a voice. And learning from her is absolutely phenomenal. Things like last week, she talked to me about honoring your time and your space and not letting people use you,
Mm-hmm.
as the key, diversity person, you know and so honoring the work that you've done. And so learning from her is going to be revolutionary for my career as well.
That's amazing. I'm so happy that you are working with her. She's a tremendous like trailblazer in the House and now in the Senate. So like I'm supporting her from afar. Um, on the note of your career, like what's next for you? I know you're studying. If you could tell us a little bit about what you're studying and how the role that you're in currently is gonna contribute to where you want to see yourself.
Yeah, good question, Raie. um, so I'm a transfer student to Hamlin, so it's been quite an interesting year, kind of integrating myself into a fully virtual environment. But I'm studying social justice, legal studies, and criminology, like I said, and I plan to go on to law school straight out of my senior year. And what I really want to focus on is criminal law. I think that I see a lot of worth spending my life working on wrongful conviction cases, working as representation for underrepresented communities that can't afford proper representation. We have a ton of issues, and this leads right back into reproductive justice, because women are disproportionately disadvantaged to be able to afford proper representation when it comes to criminal cases, which leads to higher levels of incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to be that voice for someone just seems like a life that is worth living, you know, and spending my time. And so law school will probably kill me one day, slowly at a time. But I believe that it'll be worth it to be able to bring that wherever it needs to be. I am in the midst of planning an internship with my reservation this summer to be able to learn more about Indian law, because that is also I don't know if people quite understand this, but Indian law, every tribe has its ability to make an entire different legal system. And so you have to learn Indian law to be able to practice Indian law. So learning that whole system as well, and just being able to advocate for tribal sovereignty in whatever I do is something that I really want to focus my life on. But women are always at the heart of, I feel like everything I end up doing, it ends up being around women and the power. And I believe that women, non-binary, people that identify as such, I just think that they bring an energy into rooms that you cannot manipulate. And in order to harness that and to use that to honor them and not let them be products of a racist and sexist system is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I work with all women all the time. So for me, I'm so um okay, so I have like two more questions for you before we have to end, but
Yeah.
one of them is, how can we support and elevate the work that you're doing? So you're doing, you know, from being a student, being an activist, to working at the legislature with the senator. How can we support you? How can folks that are tuning in and folks who will tune in later help support the work that you're doing?
I have one answer for this, and I'm going to stick very strongly to it. Work on educating yourself. Like, read books by people that don't look like you and that don't represent your community, and open up your horizons to the idea of other people. Because I think it wasn't until I have a background where I didn't have this, you know, political stance or these beliefs. If you would have told me I've been working for a Democratic senator 5 years ago, I would have been like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? You know? But through educating myself and other people's stories, I realized that it's privilege that I was living in, to be able to live as if, you know, my ideals worked for everyone. And that's not how it works. And so the biggest thing I think to elevate my work is to educate yourself on what's going on in the Senate, what's going on in the House, what's going on federally, and then be a voice for that. Whether it's Facebook, whether it's whatever, be a voice for that. You know, pass on your books, pass on your podcasts, whatever works for you. You know, use that to
Do you have any recommendations for the folks that are tuning in?
Oh man, books. I have so many. I think start with Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. It's a pretty popular book, but it changed my entire life. I bought it at a bookstore when I was visiting a friend in Oxford, England, and I was confused about what I wanted to do with my life, and I was traveling for a bit, and I picked up this book and I didn't put it down, and it highlights wrongful convictions in America, and it begins the critical thinking process of understanding that we need to start questioning, you know, the system that we have been taught is what it is. But yes, educate yourself first and foremost.
I love that. You like spoke beautifully to the last question that I had, which is, what is your call to action to the audience today? We talked about a lot. Like we have some pretty serious issues in Minnesota, especially when it comes to reproductive justice. So beyond maybe if you have any other recommendations, everyone educating themselves, and I assume reading books from authors who are of color, I think is very obviously a really important thing. What other call to actions do you have for them?
I think specifically, I think that a lot of people tuning in are probably from Minnesota. And so another call to action is to understand the Indigenous history of the land here in Minnesota and the people that it represents, and understanding what's going on for tribes right now, especially with the Line 3 pipeline, especially with, advocating for this new missing and murdered Indigenous woman office. The best thing that you can do as an ally is to learn from the people and learn their stories. And so I think spending time, there's a few different documentaries that are absolutely phenomenal. One is called Dawnland. It kind of highlights more of like the ICWA side of issues that are happening. And then another is called Blood Memory. Both have Sandy Whitehawk, who I've been working with, as a highlight. She's a trailblazer. She's phenomenal. I think understanding that and then using your voice. And so a lot of people are kind of scattered over everywhere. And I want people so badly to understand their voice with their representatives. Like, you call their office and you say, hey, I heard that this bill is coming up. I was just wondering if you're going to vote this way because you represent me. And I feel like this would benefit the Native people in our community or the Native people in our state. And, using your voice to be heard is just very, very, very important. And especially to my Native brothers and sisters, I want your voice to be heard, especially in this time when we've lost a few really important elections for people representing us at the federal level. At the state level, we really need to hone in and use the connections that we have to get these things passed. And so just be on the lookout for the bill coming up with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Office, and then advocate to your communities about it, is what I ask. So
Yes, and on the federal level, we are advocating for Deb for Interior.
yes, Deb Haaland is a queen. I am convinced that I am in love with her. She is amazing.
Me
But
too.
yeah, to see, she would be the highest ever elected Native American woman in office.
After none other than our lieutenant governor.
Yes, and Peggy Flanagan is also a queen. But I just think watching her just so, I don't know if you watched any of the hearings, but she's been just getting asked these horrible, like horrible questions. And I just think paying attention to how she's being treated, but also how wise she is as a Native American woman to take a deep breath and answer those questions because she knows that she's in a bigger fight, is just so beautiful. And so maybe another call to action is the women around you in your life, people, honor their voices. Yeah. Like, you're sitting in a circle and some white man is going off about his views on politics, ask a woman in the room to speak up because she deserves space in that room as well. Which I think is a beautiful segment to end on, because at the end of the day, I'm a feminist through and through, and I just am so excited to see the future generation of women just continue to run wild. Who knows? Maybe I'll end up in office one day too.
Oh, we'll be waiting for that.
You as well, Raie. Come on, girl.
Yeah, no, I recommend everyone on this call, if you haven't already thought about running for office, now's the time. Clearly, we've seen that the standards have been set low from the executive. So we all can run for office. Thank you so much for your words, SJ. I am like in awe, and I wish we could talk all day. I really love the sentiment around like knowing that we are in a bigger fight. So when any student here, if you are like in class and someone is like saying things that are just not aligning with what you are committed to, just know that you are a part of a bigger fight. Your ancestors are there. And I also, much like you, when I go into these rooms, I really believe that someone dreamt for me to stand in the shoes that I'm in today. Like, someone was dreaming about me years ago. And much like they dreamt of me, I should dream about the future too. So when I'm doing my work, I'm always thinking ahead too. And I love that you tied that back into your story and your ancestry and your heritage. So that's so beautiful. I'm so thankful. Do you have any?
Yeah, I just, my last thing I'll say is our ancestors walked so we could run. Yes. And we need to run, and we need to run without shame, without fear. So thank you so much for having me. I absolutely love talking to you, as always.
Thank you. Thank you so much, SJ. And thank you everyone who joined us. We're going to save this to our IGTV so you can tune in and watch and learn from this, because I know I'm going to probably come back to this conversation when I need a little pick me up too. So thank you everyone. And please be sure to tune in to our next CJL Spotlight happening next Thursday.
Awesome.
Bye everyone.